Flight attendants and commercial pilots of Reddit, what's the most obnoxious thing someone has ever done on one of your flights? I once witnessed a woman lay her toddler on the aisle and proceed to change his diaper. This was during boarding. I was gobsmacked. That's just plain shitty. Dora the Explorer without earphones on a night flight. Not an obnoxious passenger story, but a somewhat sad one, about a crying child. This was in the late 1970s. I was seated on a plane when a very young girl, maybe 5 at the most, was flying unaccompanied. She was escorted to her seat by her grandparents, who were loving and kissing her goodbye. They nestled a padded cooler under her feet and said goodbye, crying and holding tissues to their eyes. She was returning from a visit, and on her way back home from Maryland to California. The attendants checked on her regularly, and she was so quiet and well behaved. But she kept unbuckling her belt to bend down, and unzip the cooler and check inside. She seemed to be getting more distressed as the flight from Maryland to California progressed. I finally asked her, "Do you have a pet mouse in there?" with a smile. "Or maybe a rabbit?" She looked up at me, and her eyes welled up with tears. "No, it's Maryland crab cakes." Then she burst into tears. "Mommy said to bring home Maryland crab cakes, so Nana packed them. Mommy told me to not lose the crab cakes or she'd spank me forever. What if someone takes my crab cakes?" She just started to sob. "I can't lose the crab cakes. I can't lose the crab cactus." The passenger ahead of her was a good old boy used car salesman type who turned around and said, "Shut up, kid." I was so heartbroken for this kid who felt such pressure to deliver mom's precious cargo to her. I said, "Let's lock them up with a magic key." We zipped up the cooler case, the eye made, as if I was locking it. I put my invisible key inside her pocket. "There. No one can take your crab cakes. Now you can take a nap or eat if you like." She said, "Okay. You have to watch them for me also." I said, "You bet." Once we landed, and she was escorted off the plane by the attendant, her mother was waiting for her in the gate. She took the cooler from the girl, and said, "Come on." Mom turned around, and walked ahead of the girl, carrying the cooler, and she didn't take the girl's hand or anything. The girl was ahead of me several paces, and turned around, and waved at me as she followed her crab cake delivery. I think about her constantly. She's an adult now, and I hope she is happy. When I was flying night helicopter strip tours up and down the Vegas Strip, despite the video briefing which mentioned several times that no flash photography was permitted, and my own verbal briefing mentioning this again, people would regularly take flash photos during the flight. It just blows my mind that people would think it's okay to temporarily blind the pilot who's flying them. My godfather has been a flight attendant since the late 80s, and over the years he's had some great stories. One time, one of his passengers brought her cat on board in a pet carrier. At first glance, this woman seemed to be the stereotypical crazy cat lady. However, she took crazy cat ladiness to new frontier when it came to the cat's feeding time. Instead of cat food and a bowl of water, this woman pulls out her tit and proceeds to breastfeed the cat. I don't want to think about how much that must have hurt. Needless to say, my godfather was unamused and firmly asked her to stop. Since y'all seem to be enjoying this story, here's another one for you. One of my godfather's former coworkers was straight up crazy, schizophrenic with a streak of fundamentalism. On one flight, this crazy woman was flying with a new flight attendant, a nice young black man. In the course of their flight, it comes up that this man likes snakes and has a number of them as pets. They continue with their flight, and she notices that this guy has a prodigious bulge. As she told my godfather, "I had seen a lot of endowments before I became a born-again Christian, but nothing like that. I just know that he is traveling with a snake." She reported him to security. Turns out, he just had a big dick. I get that on long flights you want to get up and stretch your legs a little, no problem. But on a 45-minute express flight, is it really necessary to get up and start doing yoga in the back galley? Get out of my way so I can finish serving drinks to the other 70 passengers on board. Also, I don't control the weather. Most pilots have god complexes, but they are not God. so they don't control the weather either. It's not our fault your flight is delayed. With all the storms this last week, flight crews are getting fucked over just as much, if not more, than you are. I'm a pilot. Obviously the last few days have been a zoo, and Chicago has been hellish. We were going from Chicago to Milwaukee and back, and then we were done with a 4-day trip, so we were definitely wanting to get on with it and go home. We were all boarded and waiting for the de-ice truck to come spray us because it was snowing. After waiting for over an hour for the truck, they finally spray us down and we start pushing back. As we are pushing, the flight attendant calls up and tells us there's a lady that wants to get off the airplane. We tell her we can't, so the lady then tells the flight attendant that her baby is having a medical emergency and has to get off. Fine. We pull back up to the gate and let her off. The baby looks fine mind you, and ask her if she needs paramedics. She denies medical attention and refused to take the baby to the clinic that is literally 50 feet away. They had checked bags, so we had to call rampers to dig through the cargo hold to find their bags. Finally, we had them off, and we were getting ready to go again, about 2 hours late at this point. As we were getting ready to close the door, the gate agent ran up and said that when the lady found out that we were the last flight up to Milwaukee, she begged to get back on the airplane and come with us. The captain and I looked at each other in shock, told the gate agent there was no way in hell she was getting back on the airplane, and got out of there. TL. Dr. Lady feigns her child's illness to get off the airplane. After delaying the flight for hours, she then wants to get back on and come with us. My mom always tells this crazy story from her many days flying first class. 2 years ago she was on a plane that had just boarded and was sitting on the tarmac about to pull away from the gate. Sitting next to my mom was a typical business guy chat who was on a phone call yelling at someone on the other end. A very nice flight attendant comes over, leans over my mom and says, "Sir, you're going to have to turn the phone off. The cabin doors are closed." Of course if this was economy class she would have been more forceful, but she gives him a small warning. The guy quiets down, but he does not get off his phone. At this point the flight attendants are doing the safety protocol speech as the plane backs up, and all of a sudden the guy starts yelling again on the phone. Another flight attendant, this time more forceful, tells him to turn off the phone. The man turns to her and says "fuck you." She gives this humph face and then turns and goes out of sight. It is at this point of the story that my mom reminds everyone listening that many pilots are veterans. They are military men and do not take that type of crap from shats. My mom hears a door slam open and out of the cockpit comes the pilot. He is so angry you can see the veins on his face. His eyes bulge as he yells in rage, "What did you say to her? This is my aircraft, and in case of an emergency I expect every passenger to follow the commands of my air staff. You disrespecting her disrespects me and puts every person on this plane at risk." The Ashat, now being borne down upon by this massive angry ex-soldier, cowers, puts away his phone, and stammers an apology. Without missing a beat the pilot continues, "You can take your sorry and shove it. You are not going anywhere. It is a federal crime to disobey an order from your aircrew, and you can tell whoever was so goddamn important on the other end of the phone call that fact after you talked at SAP." The pilot goes back into the cockpit, pulls the plane back to the gate. Some uniformed police come in and take the guy off. Dead silence on the plane. As my mom always closes the story, "As God is my witness," everyone in unison takes out their phone, waves it in the air and shows that it is clearly in the off position, just like the tickets scene from Indiana Jones. I myself am not a flight attendant, but when I was maybe 7 or 8 I was on a flight home from Italy. Me and my parents were in the center aisle, and to our left was an older couple. The wife was rubbing her husband's very obvious erection through his trousers. I noticed and pointed it out to my mom, who pointed it out to the flight attendant. Right away the flight attendant went over to them and politely asked, on behalf of my parents, if they could refrain from that behavior, since there were children in the area. They responded rudely that they weren't doing anything. After the flight attendant moved on, they actually pulled his schlong out and put a magazine over the blatant HJ action. Eye contact was made, innocence was lost, and that flight attendant gained a story to tell on Reddit.